Thank you all for coming on Zoom. We just wanted this to be an opportunity for graduate students who are thinking about doing postdocs and current postdocs who are maybe starting to think about their next postdoc to have some time to learn from people who are either current postdocs or faculty who are either hiring or have recruited postdocs in the past. Be a nice intimate group. So hopefully good candor. Yes, so I think we're just going to start with some introductions. Start with the postdocs and then with the faculty. If you would like to share a little bit about your background, what you were looking for in a postdoc, how you ended up here. Wonderful.
So hi, I think I know most people here, but I'm Paula Cooper. I did my PhD at Purdue University and have been a postdoc here at Brett's lab for about 2.5 years now. That sounds right. And so when I was leaving the PhD program and applying for postdoc positions, I was looking for something where I could apply the skills that I gained in the lab that I was at, but not necessarily do the same thing. So I did change fields. And what was the other bit?
Kind of how you found your way here specifically,
yes.
And then any sort of advice or reflections on like what that journey was like.
Okay. So yeah, I found the posting on LinkedIn. And it was the application was through like GW's HR department. And then some advice. So I learned recently that you should email the PI after you submit an application. I was lucky enough that Brett ignored that because I didn't know to do so. Other than that, I feel like you get a lot of really bad advice when you're applying to things. So some of the advice that I got and I decided not to follow was I was told stuff like not to wear, like if you're married, not to wear a wedding band to your interviews, or to like not mention if you have family or stuff like that. And I came to the realization that like I didn't want to be part of that culture. So I didn't make an effort, but then COVID hit, my interview was virtual, so I don't even know if anyone could see my wedding band through the screen. But just stuff like that. And when it came to some advice for like the applications and the interviews is people will tell you to like be enthusiastic about the application and to to tailor your application to the place you're applying to. But I think if you are careful about where you apply and you find places that you are excited about, it goes a lot more cleanly. Like you don't have to force anything. So that would kind of be my advice, to be picky about where you apply so that it goes more smoothly.
Hi everyone, I'm Selase Deletsu. I just call me Selase. I'm a postdoc at Alberto Bosquet's lab, MIT. So, well, my journey has been interesting. I'm from Ghana, so I went to college in Ghana. I did my master's in Ghana. Then I moved to Japan for my PhD, and then when I was about finishing my PhD in Japan, after I had gotten the paper published and put in all the paperwork that was necessary to graduate, I started looking for positions. And I found well, we might talk about this more during the discussions, but I sent a couple of cold emails to PIs whose lab I was interested in. I served job application websites. Most of the big journals have job sites like science jobs, nature jobs, etc. So, and Indeed, LinkedIn. Yeah, so I found Alberto's posting, I think it was on Indeed. And then I applied to the GWH website, and just as what I did. Yeah, and I ended up here. So when you're looking for a position, you have to know what you want. Where are you now? Are you willing to move? Are you willing to move to another state, another country? Are you willing to change fields, like Paula said? Or you're looking to stay in the same field that you are? I was in HIV latency, and I wanted to stay in HIV latency. So that pretty much narrowed my field. So if you know what you want, then when you find what you're looking for, when you find a posting, you know that, oh, this fits perfectly to what I want. And then you can tailor your application towards that. Be yourself during the interview. I mean, it seems like a tense process. You practice your presentation over and over again if you're going to give a presentation and stuff like that. But be yourself, be friendly, be open. And when I interviewed with Alberto, and then I also emailed some postdocs who were in Alberto's lab, and I went to the lab website, checked out everything. So it's matched what I wanted. So I decided, and I ended up here. So that's my journey here.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from faculty about a little bit of your background in mentoring postdocs. I'd like to mention any time of the postdoc that you had, but maybe a little bit of insight into how you approach the postdoc recruiting process.
Sure. I'll start.
Yes, yeah.
I will also start with kind of the background and some information that the postdocs shared, especially since Abigail and I are not that far removed from our postdocs. But before I do, I want to point out that there's more than two, but there's two main narratives, right? There's the narrative that we put whenever we're going to be judged, right? It's what's in our bio sketch, it's what's in your cover letter. It's that narrative where every decision you've made in life has been intentional to set you up to be the perfect person for whatever it is you're writing, okay? I won't share that with you because it's also important to get the real life perspective. But I feel like that's important because you need to be aware of what your real life narrative is. But anytime you're writing or submitting anything where you're going to be judged, like that cover letter, like that email to a PI, you need to write it in a way so everything's intentional, okay? That way they're able to see your background and they get the sense that you're enthusiastic and that they need you as the candidate. Otherwise, their program's not going to be as strong. For me, I did my PhD at the University of Connecticut, and at that time, my wife said, if you could keep me in Connecticut still, that would be fantastic. Then I'll go wherever in the country. So to some extent, my search was restricted geographically in that way. There are different types of postdoc searches and timelines, essentially, that are pretty standard. If an open position is contingent on funding, those you can frequently get with a couple months notice, right? Like there's plenty of stuff, like whenever we post here at GW and it's approved, we're ready to hire someone and get them here as soon as it can happen. But it's also really common for other labs to recruit, and they're looking 6, 8, 9, 10 months out. So it's not too early to start looking and cold calling, especially because those ones are not necessarily dependent on the postings very far in advance. I would suggest, so for me then, when I was looking for a job, I did not look online for anything. I would have if I wasn't successful with cold calling. But for me, there were certain institutes that I was looking at because of the geographical restriction. And I only emailed the labs where I was really enthusiastic about what they were doing, right? Like this is a major career step for everyone, the postdoc. So I only emailed places that I was enthusiastic about their research and places where I felt I could pitch myself also. And I wrote an email to them as concisely as possible, outlining my background, my interest in their work, what I saw as my potential fit there, and you know, essentially what they'd be able to get from me. And then also attached my CV to that, so they could still look through for that. When you do that, you can sometimes, you know, like what to expect. Sometimes you'll hear a prompt, no, thank you, we don't have anything for you. Sometimes you won't hear anything at all. Sometimes you'll get that rejection email months later. But you also might get a prompt, we'd love to have you out for an interview. Once you start sending those emails, you should be expected for anything within a very lengthy process to something that within 2 weeks you're getting a job offer. Okay, because anything is fair game within that timeline. I, at the time, heard back from 2 out of only 3 emails that I had sent because I was really selective. And the lab that I joined, I had an interview set up 2 weeks later and got an offer the very next day. Okay. But when I went there, because I was already enthusiastic, that's one thing, kind of touching back to what Paul had said too. If it's something that you really are enthusiastic about, it's easier for that to come across. Everything went really well. Fast forwarding now to being in the position where I'm trying to recruit, I would also strongly encourage people to send those emails out. If there's something on LinkedIn where it's a posting, still reach out, have that personal touch, you know. That can come across in a cover letter, but when you're selecting someone, you really want someone who's truly enthusiastic, and that enthusiasm comes through much better if you're getting that communication, that direct email, instead of just uploading an application and moving forward. So I would definitely send that. But I would strongly encourage everyone here to cold call labs that they're really interested in. A lot of labs are waiting for a good candidate. They're not posting and then trying to fill a position that they need to do now. A lot of labs, they're just waiting, because if you have that good high quality candidate where you see their fit in your lab and it's someone you think is really going to integrate well, many labs are going to find the funding for that person. Especially in all likelihood, like the places that people here will be applying to, because quite honestly, we all know that there's a postdoc shortage. If you have training at a US institution and you're publishing, you're showing success, right away, you're going to be a top candidate at a lot of places here. And you should be aware of that as well, and take advantage of that. But yeah, I guess for time's sake, I'll just pass it over to Abby now so we can also get to some Q&A.
Yeah, I would really emphasize the last thing Brett said was that I would take all of the advice you get today with a grain of salt, because things have changed a lot in the last, I would say, 3 years, and the market for both looking for a postdoc and hiring postdocs. You know, when I started my lab, I posted an ad for a postdoc, and I, you know, put it on the SFN job board and the FENS job board, and I got like 70 applicants. And last year, my postdoc moved on to a position at American University, and I needed to fill the job. I posted an ad. I got 5 applicants, right? So everyone, and so this is true of labs like mine that are newer, that aren't as well known, but it's also true of labs, you know, where the PIs are in the National Academy of Sciences, have HHMI funding, and they're like, no one needs to work for me. Why can't I buy, you know, before they were just like beating postdocs away with a stick, and now they can't find any. So it's a really different market, and I think everyone from candidates to PIs who are hiring are still trying to figure out what that means and figure out, you know, kind of what the rules are. So that's a caution. My background, I'm in the Department of Pharmacology and Physiology. My last does studies neuroscience and stress. I got my PhD at University of Alabama at Birmingham. When I was finishing up, I knew that I wanted to stay in academia and try to be a PI. And so I talked to some mentors I had about, you know, what were good labs that would kind of fit my criteria. And that was that there were some specific skills I wanted to learn. I wanted somewhere where I would be mentored, not just kind of given resources and told to sink or swim. And I wanted to be somewhere, you know, I got a fantastic education at UAB, but it also was not at that time a particularly well-known or prestigious institution. Like, I didn't know that was a thing people cared about when I went there. And so I knew that I needed to improve my network a bit, right? So I needed to, if I was going to continue into academia, I needed a PI and an environment that would help me be better known for what I do. And that's, you know, that's kind of how the world is. And so I interviewed for a few positions. I was lucky I was not geographically limited, other than I wanted to not be in Alabama anymore. I interviewed for a few positions and then selected one. I was a postdoc for, I think my total time there was 6 years. I got this job about a year before I started and deferred a year for some funding reasons. And then I moved here, and I started my lab about 6 years ago. I recruited 2 postdocs pretty early on, and now I'm in the process of recruiting another one. I think a lot of the things Brett said, searching for postdocs, I would never limit yourself to people who are just placing ads, because a lot of people hire just cold emails. So send an email explaining what you've done, what you're interested in, why you want to go to that lab. You know, I think the timing is very fluid. Back when I was applying, and probably even when these guys were applying for postdocs, the advice was like, give yourself a year. I think that's a good time to start reaching out, is about a year before you defend. The answer you're going to get from a lot of people is, I don't know about funding. And so they may tell you to check back in 6 months. But for some people, they may be like, yes, just got a great score, great starts in August. If you want to start in January, that'd be fantastic. So give yourself more time rather than less. But if you are running short on time, I think in this kind of new environment, like, I would hire someone if they could come in tomorrow, because we've been without a postdoc for a while. So I do think that there's a little bit more timing flexibility. Generally, the more well-known the PI, the more prestigious the institution, the more better funded, you're going to have more competition for those jobs. And so you want to give yourself more time. You want to be prepared for a more rigorous interview or more rigorous selection process. You know, if you might be competing against other people, whereas, like, you know, the person I'm trying to hire right now, I'm like, oh my God, someone who's a neuroscientist and not a parasitologist. Because I got a lot of applications from parasitologists for some reason. So yeah, I think that's most of my kind of off the cuff advice, and we can kind of go to questions.
I want to quickly echo something that Abby said. It's, I think, really important. Figuring out what you want, right? What's important to you, and doing your homework about the labs, especially if you're going to cold call or apply. Like, do your homework about that, and you can communicate if you think that what they excel in is something that you like or anything. But you know, I applied to a lab that was sink or swim. They have like 20 postdocs at all times and enough funding that you can do whatever you want. And whoever was successful was going to get a faculty position, and whoever failed, they didn't care. I didn't choose that lab, but partially because, I did my homework on that and realized that was not for me. So it's really important that you do your homework also, and you don't feel that there's like this terrible sense of urgency that's gonna force you to make a decision that you're not happy with, because it's such a critical transition for everyone.
And talk to people when you're doing homework on a lab, like rely on your network, rely on your mentors. Scientists love to gossip about each other, right? And so, I talk to mentors and they're like, okay, this lab is great and you would definitely get a faculty position and you would do great. You could swim, in the sink or swim lab, but like, this guy's kind of sexist and I don't think you would get the support and resources that you deserve. So don't go there, right? Like, and people are very willing to share that information. Social media is great. Like, it's a great way to connect with people. Overwhelmingly, like, I have never met anyone who isn't generous with information, right? So I've kind of reached out to people and been like, hey, you work at, like when I was on the job market for faculty position, they're like, hey, you work at this institution, but not in the department I'm applying to. Please tell me, like, I got a weird vibe. Is it weird there? And, people I didn't know. And they were like, yes, very weird. Do not come here. But, things like people, it can feel awkward to reach out to someone and be like, hey, I saw that you're a postdoc in Carl Dijsselrath's lab. And like, what is it really like there? And they'll be happy to talk. They, either because they love it or because they regret it or somewhere in the middle. Reaching out to people and asking for information is really important step.
So we have some follow-up questions just to get started. You guys have been so amazing. You've covered a lot of this already in what you've been saying. We've heard the importance of reaching out to people who are not necessarily posting on job boards. That said, we want to maybe get a sense of what might be out there. Are there any resources that you could recommend, whether that's society pages or more than I would.
I think society. So nature jobs and science jobs does have listings. Those are really expensive. And so a lot of PIs who are hiring do not use those. Society websites are usually very reasonable rates. And so like for my field, I'm in neuroscience. So the Society for Neuroscience website, the Federation for European Neuroscience Society, BENS, I go to their website. I advertise on social media. There's a website called Job Archive, which is just a free job board. I see that a lot.
I think LinkedIn and higher ed jobs or higher ed.
Yeah.
Like they're similar things are posted on both of them also. That's the only thing I'd add, but yeah. Checking a bunch of these resources that Abby mentioned.
And I honestly, if you want to get a sense of what's out there, my advice would be rather than looking on job boards, just look at journals and look for papers that you think are exciting and well done and reach out to those guys.
Anything to add with the resources?
Well, this is not from personal experience, but if you're looking to get an idea about salary and stuff like that, Glassdoor is a great website. So you go postdocs at this university, they have this position, they link this to this, etc., etc. Yeah, that's a good resource for that.
Yeah, that's the other one on the note of like looking for papers that are exciting. the authors sometimes have their own website, which you can have like a job posting, or, like looking for postdocs, like on their lab website.
Got a question through the Zoom chat that just popped up, asking for a little more information about the interviewing stage and what to expect in terms of interviews, and also whether if any of you had to do like a shop talk or any kind of, so they'll ask you to do a seminar or something. That's in your experience or not.
Yeah, I had one interview with Dr. Bosque, and I was expected to present the work I did for my PhD. And then after that interview, I again had not an interview, but a meeting with the department where I again presented the work I did. Basically, during the interview, what I will tell you is don't repeat what's in your CV. The PIs already have your CV, they've seen your CV. So when they're asking you questions that you think you might have answered in the CV, they are not looking for what you put in the CV. They are looking for something else. So try not to repeat what you put in your CV. Yes. Or do you have any?
Yeah, I think. So I guess for the interview process, mine was super weird because it was like lockdown times and I was getting ready to defend, so everything was a little bit strange. Yeah. But so it was really heavy on, I think I got like a phone call. Like the first part was a phone call interview where we just talked about like sort of basic expectations for like what a postdoc would be and like what the lab resources would be. And for that, I found it really important to ask certain questions about like the lab environment and sort of who you would be working with, as opposed to like trying to showcase yourself, because like you said, they've already seen your CV. At least that's what went for me when I was looking at the phone interview. Brett might have a different opinion. But then, so it was really heavy on just the talk because that was all you could do virtually. So I tried to sort of showcase something in my research, my PhD research, that I had been excited about, because by the time you're done, you can be a little bit fed up with some of the stuff you've been working on. But I was really excited about a certain part of it, so I made sure, even though it was a little bit disconnected, I made sure to highlight that, because like it's important that you can be excited about something, even after working on it for a long time. And then during the interview, I also found it important to ask questions with like the one-on-one with the other lab members. I think in a normal world, it will be like a lunch where you get to hang out with the lab members and like no PI present, but asking questions about like what their interactions are like with the PI and like what happens if there's a conflict or like if there's a disagreement about something, just making sure that it's like the interview goes both ways. So you want to make sure that it's an environment that you'll be happy in. So that was important for me for the interview process. And I think it's, and having been present for interviews for other people trying to come to our lab, having someone who asks you questions that are like, that show interest is better than having someone that is just giving you information. So yeah, making sure to ask good questions is good.
That last part is really important. And probably towards the end of each interview, they'll ask you, do you have any questions for us? Don't say no, not at this moment. If you have questions, not that if you have questions, prepare questions to ask. Prepare questions.
I had a little book.
Yeah, so always ask questions. It's really important.
Yeah, exactly. So I think at the very least, confirming what they're saying, you should all expect to give a presentation on your research. And it's probably going to be something where there's about an hour booked for the presentation and Q&A that's given to you. So it won't be a short presentation either. That's not only the lab's way of assessing your science communication and, how you're putting things together, but, getting to see how you think, right? Everyone wants a postdoc that thinks like a scientist. No one wants to train you as a postdoc of how to think like a scientist. That happens during a PhD, okay? They want to get someone that comes in that can think like a scientist, where given the right support or whatever the resources are in the lab, that there's a chance that you'll flourish. Okay. So that's part of it. The rest, you should expect to meet with other people. And what that looks like is going to vary from place to place, but at the very least, you should meet with either people from that lab or other people within the department. And it might not only be graduate students, technicians, other postdocs, it might be other faculty members who will be interviewing you also. That can really vary from place to place and from posting to posting, position to position. So essentially, be prepared for anything, right? Like it could be a really long meeting, it could only be 2 hours. Someone might want to fly you out somewhere where you stay for a period of time, where there's even a fun social event that they do, where you go and you have dinner with the lab afterwards, see how you gel and mesh in that way. There's really a wide range of things. But I think going back to also having the questions prepared, kind of a bottom line is be prepared for anything. And I'm not just saying be prepared for anything, like literally be prepared for anything. Have that list of questions, because I can firmly echo, if someone just says I have no questions and because they want a job, like it comes through that you just want a job. Like that totally comes through that you didn't put thought into what's happening, and you're just so excited to be there, and you just want to work there, and you just want a job there. No one wants to hire someone for that, so in that sort of a role. People are, especially the postdoc, you're being brought in as someone who's going to really get engaged, someone who wants to answer questions. Don't say you just want to learn techniques. Like learning techniques in your postdoc is part of answering important questions. Come and say what the important questions are that you are hoping to answer. Even if the lab's not going to work on it, if you show that sort of thought in advance and engagement, it's going to come across really well. I've seen a lot of people propose to do exciting research in a lab where that's just not what the lab does. They're never going to do that, but it impresses the PI to see that someone's been putting that sort of thought. So yeah, having things prepared, and some of that you're going to get just because you've heard things from other people, or general curiosity you have, but ask a bunch of people maybe questions you should be asking. But more importantly, the internet is amazing, right? You can get so much out there. There are already going to be lists of, if you do a Google search, you'll probably get like top 20 things to ask in a postdoc interview. Then you'll see another one, top 50. There's gonna be common questions. Make sure you're looking at a lot of those lists and writing down a bunch of those. Bring them. Don't ask a question if it's already been answered. Move on to the next question, because there's you have very limited time, especially limited face time with the PI of the lab. Make sure you're asking those important questions. Try to keep them as much science and lab culture based, if you will, in your first interview, where you want to come across as an excellent thinking scientist who can, really move and drive a project forward. Don't start asking other questions about like what parking's like in the area and things like that, right? Like those are not important at all to the PI. And if that's what you're expressing is the most important thing, you're just not coming across necessarily the right way. Okay. Yeah, Abby.
Yeah, I think, when I interview, the interviews I structure are pretty similar to what's described. Like people come in, they meet with me, they meet with other faculty in the department, they get to talk. Importantly, they have either lunch or dinner with my lab without me there, so they can ask questions about me and ask questions about the institution that they may not want me to hear. I mean, the things that I'm looking for when I interview someone is, can they do the work that I need done, right? So do they have the skills, or do I think they'll be able to learn the skills? And that's, I get somewhat from a one-on-one meeting, somewhat from their talk. A lot of that I kind of already know from looking at their papers or talking to their PI before they interview. I'm looking for what their goals are and whether I'm a good person to help them get there, right? And so if someone comes in and they say, I want to be a PI in academia, like, we talk about how they get there, what the plan would be. You know, we might mention that like a new lab is not like the best place for that particular goal, but that it's also, there are advantages to it, and here's how I would help them. If someone comes in and they say, well, I want to do, you know, I have my PhD and now I want to do science policy, I would kind of think, well, that's not actually something you need a postdoc for. I don't, not you. Thing to get a PhD for, but then like the next step might be a policy fellowship, not a postdoc, right? You know, so it doesn't matter to me what those goals are, it's whether myself as a mentor and the lab can help the person get there, right? And whether that kind of matches them. And then the third thing I'm looking for is whether they work well with the group. And so, you know, every interaction on your interview is part of the interview. And so it's important for a candidate to meet with my lab so they can ask questions about me, but also because I want to know if my lab thinks they can work with that person, right? And if they come in and they're like, this person was kind of weird and toxic, like, I'm not going to hire them, even if I got a good impression. Because that lab dynamic is really important. So those are the main things that I'm trying to ascertain. And then kind of the other 50% of the interview is to try to convince that candidate that they should come and work in my lab. And so showing what type of environment EW is, showing what type of environment my lab is, making sure they have information and the chance, you know, even if they don't ask, like, I agree that asking about parking or housing is not necessarily a great thing to ask the PI about on an interview. Like, it is a thing to ask the other lab members, right? And making sure they have access to that information about what their life would be. So. And then, I was just gonna say, and in the vast majority of labs, if they're bringing you in for an interview, they're pretty sure they're gonna hire you, I would say. Not all of them, like, there's a varying percentage, but usually if someone comes for an interview, I feel like I'm probably going to hire them if they don't totally blow it.
One thing to add to this, which neither Abigail or myself do, some labs do, especially the more competitive, like big labs, they might also have you write your own little research proposal. So if you do apply to any of those labs, don't be caught off guard if shortly after you send an email to them, if they say, oh yeah, you know, this sounds great. By next week, can you send us a 3-page proposal on what you would do in the lab? That can catch you off guard. So that's why if you are cold calling, make sure it's something you are interested in, because you might be asked in a relatively short period of time while you're doing all these other things you're supposed to be doing, that you might need to also submit a small research proposal.
Yeah.
That freaks everyone out, and yeah, it's really stressful, but it's something that you should be aware of if you are going to want to apply to some of these big mega labs.
I wrote one with my PhD.
I have a question from a PI perspective. Like, you receive, maybe weekly, daily, a lot of emails for postdoc position or PhD. So, what is important for you that you exclude some of them, and for others you are going to the interview distance, like cover letter, session trend, PV, Bushman report.
I look for expertise first. Like, I get a lot of emails, but most of them are not from people remotely related to me, right? I look for specific interests. So the biggest tell is phrases copied and pasted from the website.
Oh, I hate that.
Like, I just delete it. Don't copy and paste from the PI's website.
Just ranted about that the other day.
Yeah, so looking for specific interests in the lab, or at least the effort to write down something that seems like specific interest. That is the first email, right? So reading the email, and then I look at the CV, I look for publications, I look for a track record of funding, if there is any. I look at timing, so a lot of the applications I get, someone may be on there like 4th or 5th postdoc, and that's someone that's just not really appropriate for a postdoc position anymore, right? So there's not, I see postdocs as a training position, like there's work to do, but also I'm there to teach that person and help them in their career goals. And at, the point where someone has bounced around between postdocs for a decade, like I don't think there's much I can do to train them.
So the first email is very
The
important.
first email is very important, yes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, conveying interest, conveying a well-written email matters. Like there's a lot of typos and it's not clear what you did in your graduate work or why you're interested in the lab. Like that's pretty clear.
Yeah, and with that, we get a lot of applicants from people who are not like English speakers as the first language. But if you don't simply use the spell check function,
Right.
that communicates that you're sloppy in how you present what should be something that's polished. I'll use your stuff as an example, right? Your application, everything that was submitted was really well polished. I get emails all the time where there's a space before the period and then no space after the punctuation, and capitalization and spelling is off. If there's something that's a little off with like grammar, sentence structure, and you can see that, okay, it's someone who's applying from a country where it's not their first language, that's a lot easier to give a
Right.
pass on. But these other things, the programs we use to draft them are sending out like red squiggly lines and all these messages, this is wrong.
Right.
If you don't correct that, that can really sink you right away. So yeah, a lot of what Abby was mentioning, I use the same thing. I'll just broaden when she said she looks for the expertise. That's going to mean something different to different labs. So here at GW, if you don't have experience with the model organism or the tissue or the techniques, too many of those things, when they start to add up, you need way too much training and you're a drain on the lab essentially. So if someone's coming who did like all yeast work and then they want to work in a complex mammal and some sort of like behavioral study or doing other assays, you need way too much work. So like you don't have any of the expertise. But if you fit the bill for some of that, what's good is at least if you can acknowledge where your deficiencies are also in that cover letter, and then highlight your strengths for why you're going to be able to overcome that. That's where sometimes the cover letter can go a long way with that. But there are some labs where they don't care what tissue you've been studying. They want to expand maybe in a certain technology, and they're okay with bringing someone in that has that technical expertise, but then maybe not expertise in that system. A lot of times if there is an advertisement, just pay attention to the language that's used, because that gives you a good indication of maybe what deficiencies a lab's looking to willing to overlook versus what they're not.
Yeah, and I would say the amount of like when I was saying expertise, I was mostly referring to like looking for someone who's like a neuroscientist or a pharmacologist as opposed to a parasitologist, for example. The amount of training that you'll need as a postdoc, technically and theoretically, how much a lab is willing or able to give that is going to vary. And it's going to vary based on the lab and the PI and the situation at the time, right? Like when I started my lab, I was like, whatever, I don't care if someone can patch. I know how to teach people to patch. Like, that's totally fine. And now I'm like, well, actually, I just really need someone on a rig patching all the time. And I have people doing these other techniques and doing a good job at it. And I have people learning to patch who are doing a good job, but what I need is someone who can do it without my help. And so that's really a big criteria for me right now. And so it's different than it was 5 years ago when I was starting my lab. Do not write yourself out because a ad suggest, you know, if an ad says, I'm looking for someone with electrophysiology experience, you know, that's often an ideal, like the perfect candidate will have that. Go ahead and apply anyway and say, I don't have electrophysiology experience, but I really want to learn this. And here's what I do. So it varies and it's hard to tell from ads or from your initial interactions. So sometimes it's just a crunch.
Open questions. Anybody, everybody?
She's not to run to class. Do you have any insight on doing postdocs at like universities versus like the NIH kind of route? You know that none of us here are NIH people.
So the pros and cons of each one. What might be more important is what you'd want to do afterwards. Historically, since the NIH, it's budget based and not getting your own extramural funding based. They haven't been able to provide the same support for grant writing, right? Because there's not a need to. Right now, though, the postdocs that are there can write a K-99, which is a grant you can get, which helps you become independent. That being the case, the postdocs there who get those are still getting fantastic jobs because they've learned the grant writing. That's been the biggest difference, like what you do afterwards. But you know, if no matter what afterwards you're going to look for some other job, maybe in industry, they might both be well suited. The other thing, the NIH doesn't provide teaching opportunities, but a lot of other universities don't provide good teaching opportunities to the postdocs. The teaching opportunity is mentoring other researchers. But the NIH has also started offering little training certifications and things like that, or do little workshops that will help people learn how to be a better teacher.
NIH has a great office of professional development for intramural trainees. They also, a lot of NIH postdocs who want teaching experience do end up getting it. Like we have people in the biology department as adjuncts who are from the NIH. The big drawbacks are, as Brett mentioned, just you have limited opportunities to apply for funding, which can be very important if you want to stay in academia. The other thing that I think can be a little underrated is that running a lab at the NIH is very different than running an academic lab. And ideally, you will take if what you want is to run an academic lab, ideally you will use your postdoc as a time to learn those skills. And you do that by watching and by asking questions. It's not something that's easy to teach something. And so people I know who have transitioned from an NIH lab to an academic, running their own academic lab, have struggled a little bit because it's just like, it's all different. So that's another drawback.
I pushed through the chat from Samantha. One was in-person networking, for example, at conferences with group PIs, influential and ending researches. And for people who want to completely switch fields for their postdocs, do you have any advice on how to network with faculty and inspired?
Conferences. So This is easiest to do if you have your own funding, but identifying a conference in that field and going and meeting PIs, you can email PIs in advance if you know they'll be there, if you know they're giving talks, and say, hey, I'm finishing my PhD. I've been focused on neurophysiology, but what I want to do is switch to neurogenomics. I'm just making stuff up right now. And I'm interested in your lab for X, Y, and Z reasons, and I think I'd be an advantage for X, Y, and Z reasons. Can we sit down and talk? And also those conferences will give you an idea of what's going on in the desired field, what's hot right now, and who the players are, and who, you know, you can talk to trainees about who to avoid and who to go to. The other thing is especially since the pandemic, like Zoom calls are really easy. And so a year and a half out, you can just start reaching out to PIs and say, I'm interested in switching to this field. Would you have time for a quick Zoom call? And not everyone will, and when they will differ, but I think you'd find a surprising amount of people are willing to have those conversations. And also, everyone really needs postdocs right now, so that will help.
Yeah, I agree. Conferences, be as strategic as possible. Just mentioned, send some emails in advance, but also take advantage of those interactions with other trainees in asking those questions, like was mentioned. It's a great opportunity, even if a PI is not there. Asking people from that lab or people within that field, as was kind of said before. Humans, I won't even just say scientists, humans love to gossip and love sharing information, and you can get insiders information on you know, who, even though they're publishing in Cell all the time, whose research is highly suspect in a field,
right,
or, you know, who has certain bad blood where, you know, if you join a certain lab, get ready for an uphill battle the whole time because, you know, they're in some sort of a war with another group. A lot of this information you can get at conferences from just talking to people.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that is a challenge when you switch field. I mean, like my graduate students could probably even tell you the names of people that I'm like, oh, we don't like their research. If you switch field, you don't know, right? And I have reasons for not liking because I think it's sloppy. And so you don't know who has a reputation of like, yes, they publish big papers, but they're really sloppy, or, you know, yes, they're doing great work, but they're like really, really demanding of their trainees. All of that stuff is sort of within field lore, and conferences are a great way to get that information. Social media is really great. There are Slack groups for, I believe there is a new PI Slack, which would not apply here, but there is a future PI Slack, which is postdocs, which I've heard can get a little like messy, but and I also believe that there's a grad student Slack for neuroscientists. So like there are networking groups like Black and Neuro for Black students and trainees. All of these groups, being part of them, can help you make those connections to make a move to a different field. And I do want to emphasize, we talk about networking, like it's important to network up and to know, you know, when you're a postdoc, know the PIs, when you're a junior PI, know the senior PIs, but equally important is that lateral networking, right? What will help you discover a good lab for you in a different field is likely going to be meeting trainees in that field and talking to them, and from them meeting the PIs.
Just about out of time. Anyone have any parting words?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about cold emails. Don't be disappointed if you don't get a reply. I would say probably more than 50% of the time you will not get a reply. Don't be disappointed if you don't get a reply. And when you she was asking about what is most important in the email. Don't just say, oh, I have interest in joining your lab. Attached here is my cover letter. And no, the content of the email itself should grab the PI's attention before they will even think about looking at your cover letter or CV. So the content of the email itself is very important. So, yeah.
I like to add, if you don't give any reply, then you have to back your first mail. There is something wrong in it. Because some people say me that they have good CV, but they don't receive any reply. So maybe there is something wrong in the email that they are sending.
Also, I don't think there's anything wrong with following up if you don't receive a reply, right? Like some of those PIs are just ghosting you and that sucks and they shouldn't do that, but it's, you know, how it is. But I miss emails all the time. We get hundreds a day, it feels like, not all postdoc applications, but like seminar notices, this committee and that committee and this class. And so it's very easy for something to just drop off my inbox. And so, don't send 6 weekly follow-ups, but I do think it's reasonable if you're really interested in the lab, you don't get a response, just send another email a week later and say, hey, I wanted to follow up. If you don't get a response then, you can, it's probably not gonna happen, but.
My parting words would be like, this is still super early for you guys, so you're not gonna be applying for a long time, so just keep in mind when the time comes who you can ask for advice. There are lots of us.
Yeah, keep putting thought into everything before you do it, so that way your actions are well received and everything is deliberate. There's a network here around you, right? Get feedback in advance, talk to people, keep being proactive about your own development though also, and take control of that by looking online. As with everything in science, don't get too upset or down on yourself for any negative response or lack of response. But if there's something that you are really enthusiastic about, really passionate about, yeah, follow up, be persistent in a respectful way, not like an email every day. Because yeah, sometimes people get bogged down with emails. It's really easy for an email to go from page 1 to page 2 in Google and then not be seen again. So yeah, just keep being proactive and your biggest advocate for yourself. This.
Yeah, and I'd say if you have more than a year to go before you defend, this should be kind of far out on your radar, right? And your challenge right now is to get your PhD work done, but also to really think about your goals, right? Because a postdoc may not be the right next step, and if it's not, the postdoc search is going to be very challenging. And so